So Peter Harris and Colin Jackson and others are starting to catch storm-petrels. You can see that the body weight varies a lot from year to year, and it's varying by more than 10% of the average. The average body weight is about 26 grams. It's the weight of £2 or £3 or euro coins. And that fluctuation we know now is very tied to the sea conditions, especially the temperature of the sea. There's a marine heat wave going on at the moment, so we're expecting to see that reflected in the body weight of the storm-petrels. And this is a graph to show when storm-petrels are heavy, it's when the sea is cold. When storm-petrels are skinny, it's when the sea is warm. And so as the sea temperature varies from year to year, we see that reflected in the birds' migration strategy. And it's all tied in with food supply. It's the sea temperatures in spring, long before the birds get here, that influence the body weights that the birds end up with as they're passing Portugal. It's dependent on the amount of food available for the birds as they pass along their migration route. So it's all linked in with climate change and how the world is responding or failing to respond to climate change, and how that impacts the food supply, the food web that the birds depend on. So I hope that's been a little flavour of why we're sitting on cliffs in the dark. Here's our survivors photo from the other night. We have a series of team photos through the 2 weeks where we gradually disintegrate in our ability to smile at dawn. But there's a Storm-petrels in Portugal Facebook group if you fancy following the story, not just this year but from year to year as well, and that's a little snapshot, if you like, of what's going on in these different projects. But it's always an annual highlight to come and join in with the research here. Thanks ever so much to the whole team for the privilege of doing that for years and years now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There we are.
Well done, Rob.
Any questions? No.
Do you have questions?
No?
No. Our lives at the moment out on the cliffs will fade it down. But we've been out catching these little seabirds, and so this talk is to outline a little bit about why we're doing this strange behaviour of spending our nights out on the cliffs of the Algarve. So the project is all about the European storm-petrel, and it's the smallest of the Atlantic seabirds. As you can see, it fits very snugly into the palm of your hand. Many of these guys have had storm-petrels in the palm of their hands in the last couple of nights. That hand is a particularly big hand. It's the hand of Big Dave Kelly of Trinity College Dublin, but it illustrates the tiny size of the birds and the amazing lives that they lead. And they're global travellers. They go the right way. They have this amazingly long migration journey. So they spend the winter off South Africa, Namibia, and some of them go round the Cape into the Indian Ocean, and we know this from some of the tracking technology that is coming through at the moment. And they spend almost all of their lives out on the open ocean. They're out there now, they go to sleep out there, they really only come on shore to breed, and we study them various places, here in Portugal of course, on that migration route when they're migrating northwards at this time of year towards the breeding colonies. We study them in the Faroe Islands. Ben, who's coming out next week, is about to start a PhD on the Faroe Islands storm-petrels, but he's been working there the last few years as well. Also up on Shetland in Scotland, and of course our favourite islands on the coast, off the coast of West Wales, Skocum Island in particular, and that's where Ellie did her Masters that she's recently just completed on the beautiful voices of storm-petrels. And they're just remarkable birds, and it's been a real sort of joy of my life to be studying them, partly based here at Trusinia, and I've been coming back as much as I can for the Storm-petrel season since 1993, and that's when I first met Paolo and Marcial.
And Bebe.
Yeah. And Bebe. Especially Bebe, I would say.
Thank you.
And you know, over the years I've got older, and so has everybody else, of course.
Except Bebe.
Except Jesus, young as she always looks. And storm-petrels as well, they have long lives, and it's quite common for storm-petrels to get to more than 20 years of age. There are plenty of storm-petrels that are older than plenty of you, and the oldest storm-petrel known was caught as an already adult and recaught then 39 years later, so it would be more than 40 years old, which is not as old as me, but but they're obviously very, very good survivors for many, many years out on the open ocean, and a lot of our studies are about how they manage to do this and how we can conserve these amazing seabirds in a changing world. They're not super rare, but they're not super abundant. There's about 500,000 European storm-petrels in the world, in terms of breeding pairs, 500,000 breeding pairs, I should say. And they're divided into two main populations: the Atlantic population, which is the ones that are very migratory, they go down to southern Africa, and the Mediterranean populations, which are mainly buzzing around the Mediterranean. They do come out into Portuguese waters, we know. We've caught an Italian storm-petrel here in the past, and they diverged several 100,000 years ago, and so they're on their way to becoming different species, and some people would say that they are two different species. But the size of those dots represents how many storm-petrel breeding pairs are there in different parts of Europe, and the species used to be called the British storm-petrel, and you can see that that's a little bit wrong, because if we're going to call it after a country, it should be the Faroes storm-petrel, because that's where the biggest colonies are. In fact, Ben works in the biggest colony of European storm-petrels in the world, on Nolsoy Island in the Faroes. So that's one of our great friends up in the Faroes, Jens Kjell Jensen, and he really loves the idea of the Faroese storm-petrel. And so, in terms of conservation, it's important to know how many things there are and how those numbers might be changing. But counting storm-petrels is quite tricky. It's as easy as counting trees, except they're very small, shy, nocturnal, underground, and they're usually not there anyway. And so there's various tricks for counting them. One is by playing this little song, Sound of a Fairy Being Sick, at night, into the potential burrows and rock crevices, dry skull walls where the birds live. And this is one of our former recent PhD student, Zoe Deakin. Zoe's been out here at Cruzinia, and she's up there on Shetland carrying out these playback surveys, as they're called. And if a bird is in the burrow, it may reply, and then you know that that's a potential breeding pair. Here in Portugal, of course, we catch them with a different method, which is playing the song at night next to a mist net, and the birds fly around and around. This year we've got these amazing thermal binoculars, so we can see, as if it's broad daylight, the birds flying around in the dark, and starting to understand their behaviour as they're being caught. It's quite fascinating new discoveries that we're able to make with this bit of kit this year. And Ellie, as we say, has just finished her masters really on the songs and calls, based on this lovely island Skocum off the coast of West Wales. And we heard the song earlier. It's a kind of bubbling, purring song. The males do the purring, interspersed with and the females as well as
You won't be on the internet.
And so Ellie has been looking at how these calls vary between the males and the females, how it varies geographically and over time as well. So fantastic work being done there. And Ellie Lewis then, other Ellie, is going to be looking at the species differences, and the different species sound different, and that might relate to their lifestyle and their evolution as well. So that's going to be Ellie's master's project next year. The European storm-petrel is just one of about 28 species of storm-petrels, and we say about because it's quite hard to count species, because there are species that go extinct. So the Guadeloupe storm-petrel in the top right, it's probably extinct. It's hard to prove that something is definitely extinct, but it hasn't been seen since the 1910s, and so a very unlikely survivor. But other species we thought were extinct, like the New Zealand storm-petrel, top left, it wasn't seen for more than a century, and then it popped up again in the seas off New Zealand, because its population was recovering from rats in the colonies, and the rats had been exterminated. And New Caledonian storm-petrel and Pincoya storm-petrel, new species that have been discovered in the last 10 years or so. And other species, the Monteiro storm-petrel of the Azores, we've recently realised, Mark Bolton, the former warden of Cusinia here, is involved in the description of Monteiro storm-petrel as a different species that breeds in the summer from the bandrunt petrel that breeds in the same burrows on the Azores in the winter. So there's all these discoveries about species that we didn't really know existed. But there are two main groups, the northern storm-petrels. As you can see, they all look very, very similar. They've got quite different voices, different behaviours, different migrations and so on. Lots of northern storm-petrels, and then there's the southern storm-petrels as well. And the northern and southern storm-petrels, they look very, very similar, but it's turning out that genetically they're actually two different families, and the southern storm-petrels are more closely related to the albatrosses than they are to the northern storm-petrels. It's just completely bonkers. So there's lots to discover and lots being discovered. And we are very familiar with the European storm-petrels here, but we also, on our boat trip, we're likely to see the Wilson storm-petrel, the Southern Ocean, different family. In fact, I was on a boat at night last week, and we hand caught a Wilson storm-petrel by attracting it into a torch beam. Amazing to have an Antarctic breeding bird in your hand in the waters off Portugal.
Just came like that, with a beam then?
Yes, yeah. Carlos used to come here. Oh, Wilson storm-petrel. And you can see the size of the storm-petrel compared to the albatross in the picture. Very closely related families, but just completely different ends of the size spectrum. And they spend their lives out at sea, and of course they don't have fresh water to drink, so they have to drink seawater, and they filter it with their kidneys to get rid of the salt, and they also have a gland above their eye, and that removes salt as well at very high concentration. And when we catch the storm-petrels, you can sometimes see the salt being dribbled out from their nostrils. And that's how they're getting rid of the salt that they've had to drink. And they basically don't need to drink fresh water at all.
Okay.
The egg is, they only lay one egg a year, not every year either. But it's, in terms of the size of the egg compared to the bird's body, it's basically the biggest egg in the world. Up to 30% of the adult body mass, which is incredible for a tiny little flying bird that jinks around in flight. And it produces an enormous chick from that enormous egg. When we're catching the birds, this is what we're looking for when we're looking for the brood patch. It's this patch of pink feathers, the feathered area that warms the egg to keep it at the right temperature for the chick to develop. And then the chick has a little egg tooth, little sharp bit on the end of its beak that it uses then to crack the shell and hatch itself out into the nest. And storm-petrel chicks are definitely the cutest chicks in the world. These are some of Ben's chicks from the Faroe Islands. Although it's in a cupcake holder, don't eat them. We're using the cupcake holders there. Last few years we've been worried about bird flu transmission, so each chick has its own cupcake. And the chicks get fed basically fish soup from the parents, regurgitating semi-digested fish, again don't try this at home, into the chick's mouth. And this is the chick's body weight over its lifespan in the nest. And you can see that the chicks get much, much heavier than the adults. Some of the chicks are more than twice as heavy as their parents. And this is a strategy because their feeding is quite unpredictable. So they get very, very fat in case the parents don't turn up for a few days. And if the parents don't turn up, they just use up the fat reserves. And part of that strategy is a strategy of hypothermia, down-regulating their body temperature. If the parents haven't turned up to feed them, they turn down the thermostat by 10, 15, 20 degrees and then regulate their body temperature at that lower temperature until the parents come back with food. They sit on the chick to warm up the chick, it springs back to life and they give it a feed. But when it's at that lower temperature, it's torpid, it's unresponsive. It can be attacked by predators, or even these little beetles can kill chicks when they're torpid. So it's a risky strategy, but it helps them to survive these feast and famine periods of parental feeding. But that torpor can last for several days, and that is the definition of hibernation, being torpid for more than a day. And so storm-petrels are one of the very few birds that are known to hibernate as chicks. So in our projects, based at Cardiff, but including here at Crucenia, we're lucky to have various bits of technology to understand the birds' lives. With Ben, with some of his study species, these are the little GPS trackers that you can attach to the bird's tail feathers, and that tells you to within a few metres where the bird has been out on the open ocean, and that's really revolutionising our ability to follow the birds and understand their lives. Here's the Faroe Islands up at the top, and the yellow dots are the position of a breeding storm petrel every 30 minutes on its journey out from the Faroe Islands, and we can look at that in a lot of detail. Here's a good team. Mark Bolton, former warden here, he now is in charge of seabirds at the RSPB. It means he tells puffins what to do or something. Here's Bardsey Ben and Zoe Deacon, the three generations, I guess, of storm petrel researchers. All downloading one of the first GPS tracks of storm petrels at sea. Amazing sort of discovery science going on in real time. And we can code those by whether the bird's feeding in blue or commuting in yellow, whether it's happening by day or night. And so we're starting to unravel the behaviour of the birds at sea, in the dark, all of these aspects of their lives that we just simply had no idea about until just a couple of years ago. Here's another of our recent PhD students, Hannah Hereward, Azores Hannah we call her in our house, because she started a PhD at Cardiff, and we popped her in a jiffy bag out to the Azores, and we saw her again a couple of years later. So Hannah developed a system of looking inside storm petrel nests, again in the dark, using little Raspberry Pi cameras, so circuit boards with camera lenses attached and recording system attached to it. And this really revealed a lot of the social behaviour of storm petrels in their nest. Pair bonding, adults and chick interactions, and that's been adopted now in other parts of the breeding range. This is Skokholm Island, where the wardens have built what they call the petrel station. It's a wall of nest boxes, tens and tens of nest boxes, designed specially for storm petrels to breed in. And this is Petrel Station 1, overlooking the lighthouse. There's now a Petrel Station 2 at the nearby farmhouse as well. And our collaborators on Skokholm Island, the wardens, Chris Payne as well. Chris specialises in videoing. This is the adult and a very recently hatched chick that it's giving its first meal to. And so amazing footage you can see how big the chick becomes after a few weeks. It's a ball of fluff much bigger than the parent, and then it has to slim down again to actually fledge from the nest. But the parent there is basically regurgitating this semi-digested mush of fish and invertebrates for the chick's first meal. See, the chick's feathers still quite damp, it hasn't fluffed up yet after hatching. And there's Chris with the petrol station, amazing resource for research. And then a lot of our work has been to do with the diet of storm-petrels. Here's Renata, who many of you have interacted with, and my colleague Bill Simonson. He was a professor at Cardiff University. He died a couple of years ago. And Bill and Renata really have specialised in investigating the diet of seabirds, including storm-petrels. And the birds feed at sea by pattering over the water surface, dipping their legs into the water, and reaching forward to pick at whatever they find at the water surface. Fish eggs, crustaceans, all sorts of things. But as they're doing that, they're vulnerable to attack from below by fish. So sometimes when we catch storm-petrels, we find that they're missing a foot or even a whole leg. It's been snipped off by fish biting them from below, it seems. And the project here, of course, we're attracting the birds into mist nets by playing the calls and songs of the birds, and sometimes the birds will regurgitate food, or they'll do a poo, and we can extract DNA from those samples. And that's what Renata and Bill really specialised in, identifying storm-petrel prey using DNA. It all happens by magic in the lab. I don't get involved in all of that stuff, but it's basically working out the sequence of base pairs to say this storm-petrel has eaten this species on this day. And so we know a lot about the different species that storm-petrels eat. Here are some results from Portugal. When storm-petrels are passing Portugal, they're eating a lot of sardines, as do I when I'm passing. But they eat all sorts of other things. These are sort of isopods reveal that they're actually foraging along the beaches at night, and that's exactly what we're seeing in our thermal binoculars now. Birds coming right on shore and dipping around the breaking waves, essentially. They also eat things like butterflies and bees that they find out on the open ocean on their migration. A lot of butterflies are migratory, and storm-petrels seem to eat them as they're out on the open ocean. Storm-petrels have also been found to eat dolphin, not a whole dolphin probably, let's hope, but it could be dolphin feces or dolphin placenta or bits of dead dolphin that they're scavenging around at sea. So we're finding all of these revelations really about the bird's diet, and here in Portugal we're especially interested in how that relates to their migration strategy. So this is a graph that we'll update over the next week or so. This is the body weight of the birds as they're passing Portugal each year. From 1990, when the first storm-petrels were caught here. Were you here in 1990?
No, I started in 92.
Right.